guess it was the jingle. Thanks everyone for attending this session. I'm Samuel Montero, Head of ESG and Impact at Investisseurs et Partenaires, an impact investor that support African SMEs. I'm glad to be the moderator today. Maybe starting by thanking Convergence and UNDP for co-organizing this session. UNDP, as the UN lead agency on international development, helps to develop policies, leadership skills, and to build resilience to achieve the SDGs. Hence the topic of this roundtable today. And we are going to discuss about this increasing urgency and the arising opportunities to channel financial flows toward the SDGs. A quick context before to introduce the panelists. We know that to achieve the SDGs, we need a significant transformation in the way economic growth is generated and a greater role for the private sector. According to the OECD, the financing need to reach these SDGs have increased by 70% in 2020 due to the COVID-19 crisis. In addition, we all know that the war in Ukraine is also going to have alarming effects due to inflationary pressures. To answer to these challenges, governments have increased their level of debts, and developing countries have increased their borrowing levels by 12%. And we know that these have created financing constraints, and these constraints call into question the ability of these governments to invest on climate change adaptation and to invest on sustainable development. But this crisis have also triggered a growing interest in all sustainability-related instruments that can foster a more inclusive and sustainable recovery. So we have seen positive disruptions in the financial systems, especially through ESG, environmental, social, and governance approaches. We have also seen investments in mutual funds and ETF that have grown, and especially the global issuance of thematic debt have increased a lot, with green, social, and sustainable bonds from both public and private issuers that expect to surpass $1.5 trillion in 2022. But if we know that these amounts are encouraging, we also know that the total global wealth is estimated at around $430 trillion. But we know that most of these investments are going to developing countries, to developed countries, and that we still have the question about the sustainability of this investment. So today, through this panel, we are going to address the role of this new tool of sustainable bonds and other debt instruments. We are going to also talk about the challenge to de-risk and to have a leverage effect on this capital. And we are also going to talk about the efforts that some institutions are undertaking to scale their impact. So let me introduce this panel. So I have some notes because I will try to not make any mistakes, and please correct me if I'm wrong. I have tried to don't put any data because I was terrible to remember any dates in history, so it was easier to be short. So I'm going to start with Tanke. Tanke Zoltani is based in Switzerland. You are the Senior Thematic Debt Advisor at UNDP, and you lead the agency's debt service offering, where you are responsible for the global portfolio. I'm going to pass over your many other activities because you are also the founder of Better Finance, an advising company, and you also hold several board positions. So thanks a lot for being here. Then Anne-Laurence Roucher. You had several experiences as project manager and business analyst before joining Natixis. From there, you have created a new business unit dedicated to responsible investment, which later developed into Mirova. And you are now, if I'm correct, the head of private equity and natural capital at Mirova. So also, thanks a lot for being here. Then we have Denis Sirejol from Propaco. You also have many years of experience in investment banking. You had several positions at Proparco. You have started as an analyst in Madagascar, then you took more responsibilities in Brazil and South Africa as regional head, and now you are the head of MAS, Manufacturing, Agribusiness and Services. And finally, Maha Keraman, you had an experience at the World Bank and at Deloitte, and then you joined BNP Paribas in 2006. You are the head of, and now I need my notes, Positive Impact Business Accelerator at BNP Paribas. You are doing a lot of things, and especially we are going to talk a lot about the new financial products that you are working on, especially social impact bonds, and you have worked specifically on the first French social impact bond with the Ministry of Finance dealing with job reintegration in rural areas. So thanks a lot for being here. I'm going to start by asking some questions, but then feel free to interact between each other. You will almost not hear me anymore. But I will start by you, Maha. We know that global issuance of thematic debt has increased, but we also know that only a small fraction of it is represented by sustainability-linked bonds. So how can banks and other financial institutions can increase their commitment into this kind of tools?
Thank you, Samuel. Hello to everyone. I'm very happy to join this panel. So maybe just a quick, who knows what is a sustainability-linked bond? Okay, so it might be useful. Might be useful, sorry for the one who already know. So sustainability-linked bonds, they have the particularity of embedding one or various predefined sustainability targets within them that issuers commit to achieve, and on which there is the interest rate or the coupon of the bond is computed, meaning that it can go both ways. If the KPIs are achieved, if the KPIs are the KPIs that are predefined are achieved, then the issuer gets a reduction of the interest rate he's supposed to pay, and if the KPIs are not met, meaning that its sustainability targets are not met, therefore he needs to pay more interest rate or coupon. So it is an interesting tool in order to have the sustainability targets aligned within a corporate. So sustainability targets can be, for example, reduction of water consumption within the production manufacturing system. It could be, for example, reintegrated a species, a biodiversity species that is in extinction, or in the context of the company. It could be reducing CO2 emissions. There are a lot of possible KPIs, but it is interesting because it can finance general purpose companies, whereas other global issues such as green bonds or social bonds, they are usually linked to a use of proceeds, therefore they're usually linked to very dedicated projects. So it is an interesting tool. However, as you were saying, it's not very common. Why? Because first it's new. The first one was done in 2019, so it's quite new. So this is maybe one of the reasons why it's not very well developed. And the second is probably also because sustainability linked bonds, for the time being, they have the purpose of linking directly extra financial practices of a company with its financial solidity. It means that what we consider when we do a sustainability linked bond is that if the sustainability practices of a company are respected, it will increase its credit worthiness. It will increase its financial resilience. And this, for the time being, is a hinge. Yes, it is a hinge, but we don't have enough historical data or historical track record to be able to actually improve this and to be able to actually link the sustainability-linked loans or bonds pricing to the result and to the sustainability practices that are improved. And for the time being, it's a negotiation. When we say you will be, if you get your sustainability targets, it will reduce your interest rate by 10 basis points, 25 basis points, and it's a kind of negotiation. I think that what will do that it will scale, it will be to be able to say, okay, because you reduced by X% this, or because you reduced your consumption or whatever, this actually has a real price, it has a real economic value, and it will impact your economic and your financial resilience, and we are able to actually say by how much is going to improve your financial profile and your credit worthiness. And I think this might be the way that we could scale a little bit more this instrument.
Okay, thanks a lot. Anne-Laurence, so we are facing several crises, but how can we turn this crisis into new opportunities, especially for people and planet? And what are some of these innovative tools that can be used by private investors to turn this crisis into opportunities?
So using crises to turn them into opportunities is something we tend to understand more and more. I think for climate, it's getting better understood for a couple of years now, even if it's still underinvested. We can think about net zero pledges and race to net zero and the related investments. But we also have a number of other crises beyond COVID or Ukrainian war, which are related to the fact that we are crossing the planet's boundaries, and it's not only related to climate, it's about soil degradation, biodiversity loss, and so on and so on. And so here we know that there is a need to invest to change our impact on the planet, to change also the lives of the livelihoods. And so to do that, our goal at Mirova is really to be additional in the investment we do, which is one dimension of having impact. It's really being additional. And to some extent, we don't use very innovative tools. We use old tools that sound innovative because they're getting better known today. I will just mention two tools. The first one is blended finance. So here, this round table is a very good example of what blended finance is. Blended finance means mixing private and public money to actually leverage public money and enable private money to come with some with advantages to that. The four uses of blended finance are first concessional money, which is something we used a lot, which is actually de-risking mechanism where public money takes a first loss position, and typically the AFD institution has been very helpful for us in the launch of our land degradation neutrality fund a couple of years ago. So that's a first tool which is very catalytical. The second one is guaranteeing. So it's not being first loss. It can be guaranteeing as first loss or pari passu loss. The third one is providing grants. And the fourth one is about providing technical assistance facility. So these are the four tools around blended finance, if I summarize a little bit. To give you some interesting figures, the first time we used blended finance was 20 years ago to launch one of the first renewable energy infrastructure fund in France. And at that time, we did a partnership with ADEME, who was the providing de-risking tranche, and it enabled our investors to get a net yearly return of 9%. So it worked, it delivered, and alongside that, we invested 40 million into renewable energy infrastructure projects across France. So that's the first tool, which we call blended finance. And again, it's not new, but it's getting much better known because we need that. The second tool we use, and often it's in conjunction with blended finance, it's coalitions. We see that a lot. I think COP21 worked well because there were coalitions, corporate coalitions, civil society coalitions, and so on. And coalition means that you are not only one asset manager trying to be additional somewhere. No, you get the support of public money through blended finance. You also get the endorsement of public body, which can be UNDP, which can be UN Convention to Combat Desertification. So you get sponsored. You can also get standards to work to help you actually deploy money with standards of impact. So that can be typically the IFC performance standards. That can be the IUCN STAR approach to measure how you help preserve the endangered species. So having funds that you launch in conjunction with the IUCNs, for instance, helps. And then you can also have access to networks. So typically CPIC networks, so coalitions that give access to sourcing networks to source pipeline. This helps. So if you add concessional money and the support of institutions with diverse positive effects such as credibility, standard, and pipeline, you can have more a larger impact in terms of fundraising, in terms of deployment, and in terms of quality of impact, because it's you have a larger number of tools to achieve that. Sorry, it was a long answer, but it's
thanks a lot. Very interesting, and that's true that we always use the term of new for things that are not always new. Thank you. So UNDP is increasingly supporting sovereign debt issuance. You are also supporting SDG and thematic bonds, climate swaps, etc. What are the challenges that you faced to develop these instruments in developing countries?
Denny and I were just exchanging on that a little bit earlier. So I think there are myriad challenges. I mean, we can talk about speed and efficiency or inefficiency of governments, but ultimately I think it's really access of emerging markets to debt capital markets, specifically being able to reach the investors that have capital. So they're primarily the developed market focused ones, but that won't invest because of their fiduciary duty. So they have specific requirements or criteria when it comes to credit risk, what they can and cannot put money into based on the sovereign risk profile. So this is something that UNDP has not been positioned traditionally to help change or help enact, but indeed I think among us panelists today, we are trying to form coalitions of like-minded organizations to provide better access to countries. What does that look like? On the one hand, yes, I think it's crafting smart KPIs, putting together very interesting instruments that look less risky from a long-term investment perspective, so they will enhance the nature profile of the country, help boost the economy, create employment, etc. But at the same time, also open access to these markets. So how we do that, I think it's going to be quite a long process. How do you improve a credit rating? It's not quick over time, but we're trying to build capacity. So the very typical UNDP type of work, we do a lot of trainings for countries, a lot of education, and then coalition building, certainly. I think it needs to be part of the equation. So I want to give a more optimistic answer, though. So yes, there are a lot of challenges, but at the same time, I think in the pipeline now there are 40 countries that we're working with. I think hopefully 10–15% of those will issue, which is already going to be a big win on the SDG investment front.
Thanks a lot. Maybe one additional question, but traditionally we were used to seeing the public sector as an actor that is here for the wealth and the health of the population, and the private sector that is here only for financial return. When you try to train and build capacities, do you still feel that people have this mind, or do you think that it's evolving?
So the question is the difference between impact and finance, more or less? I think at the government level, this is not the case. Within the UN, so I also come from the private sector. I'm working in banking and asset management. I was also very skeptical. But at the same time, I think the financial returns can be very attractive for investors. We need to walk a fine line of being very sensitive that as the UN, we're not encouraging very high levels of interest or additional debt taking. So we can talk about our role in how we're originating these instruments, because certainly we do not tell governments, yes, you should be issuing new debt. So we're quite careful about that. But at the same time, we realize that the returns have to be commensurate with the risk taken. There's a role for concessional finance to come in, but I think ultimately, as our impact markets become more sophisticated, then investors will see more and more the link between impact, long-term development outcomes, and financial returns. And I think when you were pointing out earlier about the market development, we're already seeing this boom in sustainability-linked bonds or broader thematic debt, and that's a response to your question, I think.
Thanks a lot. Denise, we know that DFIs can play an important role in times of crisis, and especially to create catalytic change. So how can we increase this leverage effect, both in terms of capital allocation, but also in terms of impact creation?
Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. Very happy to be here. First question maybe to the audience is, how familiar are you with DFI and the mandate of a DFI? Okay, one. So maybe not so much. So DFI means Development Finance Institution. In our case, Proparco, we are owned by the French government, and most European countries have their own DFIs. We also have multilateral institutions like the World Bank, the African Development Bank, the European Bank of Investment. And before answering your question, I also state that if you put all the DFI money together, all these investments, they are still a drop in the water as compared to non-DFI investment, public and private investment. So in our approach, we try to be, we should be modest and humble about the actual money that we deploy, because it's nothing as compared to the inflows and outflows in emerging countries. But where maybe we try to play a role, as you say, it's about leveraging on what we do to try to convey messages to private sector in our case. And if we go back in time, 15 years ago, the role of a DFI was mainly, to simplify, to bring long-term finance in, let's say, fragile countries where the financial systems were not efficient. In many African countries, 15 years ago, banks, they did not have the capacity to finance long-term. So roads, infrastructure in general, hospitals, these projects could not be financed 15 years ago. And the role of a DFI 15 years ago was mainly to do that. Now the world is a little bit more complex, because we know that growth can be detrimental to climate. We knew that 15 years ago, but now we are realizing this more every day. Now it's obvious. So growth can be detrimental to climate change. Growth can be detrimental to biodiversity. Growth can be detrimental to poverty, and it can create additional inequalities. So let's say that the context is more complex today, but growth can also be leveraged and can also be useful. So it's more difficult today to find projects that have a positive impact on inequalities and at the same time a positive impact on biodiversity. So 15 years ago, the leverage effect was mainly to bring additional finance. But today, to me, it's not so much a question of money, because there is more liquidity in the market, some crises being put aside. But there is more liquidity in general in the market. So I'm going to rephrase a little bit what you said, Anne-Laurence, about the fact that the leverage effect today, it's about building partnership, it's about building coalitions, technical assistance, training. We see that our private clients, they need the funding, but fortunately, private banks can now bring the funding, and the role of a DFI is to discuss with these private companies, maybe to, let's say, to push them to question the way they are making profits, so they can share the profits with the planet or with their employees, for example.
Thanks a lot. So maybe a new round of questions and maybe a bit more of challenging questions. So we have said that sustainable bonds are growing, but we also know that it's still a niche market. So what are the strengths and weaknesses of this kind of tools, this kind of tailor-made instrument versus large-scale instruments? And can we see a potential trade-off between impact and scale?
Difficult question, indeed. Well, first of all, you talked about impact bonds. Another little, who knows what is an impact bond? 1, 2, okay. So yeah, so maybe just a little reminder. So an impact, if we were saying that sustainability-linked bonds are niche, well, impact bonds are even nicher, if we could say. It's really confidential. So it's a mechanism that allows to finance research and development, innovative experimental programs that are bared by NGOs or social enterprises, and with a specific targeted, measurable impact. And how is it financed? It's financed by a pool of private investors who will actually finance the program. And then the originality is that the NGO doesn't bear the financial risk. It is a public authority, when we are, it could be a government, it could be a ministry, or it could be a DFI, who bears the actual financing if and only if it works, meaning that if the KPIs, impact KPIs are achieved, then the public authority or the DFI is going to reimburse the investor and even pay him a premium if we overperform on the impact. So it's a very interesting mechanism because it is a coalition, what we were talking about, between private investors, public, multilateral, sector and the third sector, the NGOs. So it's a coalition between the three actors, and it's also very original because it links completely this time the impact that is generated with the economical value and the profitability that the investors are going to get, which is not very common in the impact investing space, because here the more the impact, the more the profitability, because the underlying concept is that when you create impact, you actually create economic value. You create cost avoided for society. If you put someone in employment, if you avoid childhood, if you avoid child to be put into foster care, then you have cost avoided for the society. You have 60,000 euros per child that are avoided, and moreover, it is better for the child himself. So it's all built on this economic system that there is an actual value of impact. But as you were saying, it is tailor-made, so it is very focused. So it's quite niche, and the programs are currently quite small because it's quite difficult to put in place. But what it would be interesting is that it cannot finance all action. However, I think it could be a good space to build innovation and to see what are the programs that work. Because when a program works, that you can test through an impact bond, then you can scale it with another tool that is much bigger and much scalable. So I think that all those tools, they should work together, and each one should learn from the other. I think that what is interesting in impact bonds is that it's very, very, very tailor-made and very specific fine-tuning in impact. And this is not the case of all sustainability type of product. And what the impact bond could learn about other product of sustainability is how to make it bigger, more standardized probably, in order to be able to achieve more impact. We have one program with AFD currently in Ethiopia, which is a pilot, which is to build to fight against precariousness, menstrual precariousness in Ethiopia. And what is interesting with this program, also an advantage of the tailor-made impact bond, is that it will take all the holistic view of the menstrual hygiene problematic. It won't target just one, like they need access to pads. It will target at the same time the access to pads, the need for infrastructure in the schools, because if you don't have infrastructures, then the girls, they won't go to school because they are not able to deal with their menstruations while they are at school. And it will also deal with the whole taboo mentality changes within the country. So what is interesting also with the tailor-made focus program is that they can address holistically, and they can have a pilot. It can be a pilot that sees that what are the things that work, and then when we know what works, then we can scale them, because we know that this has worked in a very small pilot.
Thanks a lot. So keep your mic. I'm going to add one tricky question. No, but sometimes we have read articles about, let's say, to criticize impact bonds because of the low ambition in terms of impact, saying that in fact it was too easy to reach these impact objectives. Is it just a specific case, or from your experience, since you have worked in several, do you think it's, let's say, justified or not?
I think that in an impact bond, what is interesting is that we position all the KPIs in the whole theory of change. That meaning that you have KPIs that are easier, that are lower in the theory of change of impact, that are easier to achieve because they are faster to achieve, and others that are much more long-term KPIs to achieve, and you need all of them in order to deliver an impact. And I think what those criticisms don't grasp is that more than the actual KPIs that are measured, all the information that is available, the qualitative information that is available thanks to those type of programs is unique. We have a program in Belgium that is targeting homelessness for NEETs, so not youngsters that are not in education, employment or training. And actually what is interesting for the government of the ministry that supports this program is that they don't have access to those people. So for them, the first impact is to be able to reach those youngsters and to be able to accompany them and support them. And without this program, they just cannot reach them. So then the program also adds employment, and it also adds housing. But the first benefit is also for the government to be able to know those needs and to see what is the trajectory that leads them to homelessness. So I think this is something that is not sufficiently discussed in those criticisms.
Thanks a lot. And Laurence, a question that is close to this one, because how do you think private equity and debt funds can also deal with this potential trade-off between impact and scale? You have already starting to talk about partnerships. Do you think that it can be a way to tackle this potential trade-off?
Yes, definitely. I will take two angles to discuss the size and the impact. First one is that when we want to be additional, we want to have an impact in areas which are underinvested, which means that we will find developers who are not big. I will give you an example. We know that to sequestrate carbon, we need to restore forests, but also mangroves. Mangroves has a very high capacity to sequestrate carbon. But that being said, the project developers of such mangrove restoration programs aren't that many, and the projects are typically small today. So what do? Do we say we don't finance mangrove restoration or forest restoration, or do we go there even if the projects are small? and I'm talking about blue carbon, green carbon, but there is also that same approach for soil and restore the quality of soil. There is also approaches for agroecological transition and forestry or agroforestry in the most sustainable way. And projects aren't always very large. So what do? We can have phased approaches, starting to seed at seeding level, so projects at very early stage level, which is what we call seed. So we can put ticket of 50K, which is really small. Then we can increase to 100, 150, then 5 million, then 50 million, 15 million. And then we can even grow bigger, given the level of maturity of the project developers. So this is a good way to show that there is a temporality around that. When you want to be additional, you need to go to the project developers, fund them when they are small, and the ones who go bigger, you can also them finance their growth. So then what about impact? As Maha said, I think what's important in the coalition is that we get standards. And so we have reference points to define how you want to operate. And what does it mean? It means that you have key points in the way you're going to operate from an environmental and social perspective. So to put it very simply, from a social perspective, we're going to pay attention to the basic rights, the fundamental rights of the workers in emerging markets. Often they are not well respected. So first, can we make sure this is going to be the case? And then that's the next level of Maslow's pyramid. How can we make sure that we create actually new jobs with enough gender diversity and jobs which are decently paid? Like, it's not just creating jobs, poorly paid jobs. It's just like looking at the average paycheck you're gonna generate, and is it above or beyond what's in the area? So that's the social side. On the environmental side, it's very easy, basically, to say, oh, okay, I'm gonna sequestrate carbon. I focus only on this. It doesn't work at all, because you can plant eucalyptus. They grow very fast, but they pump a lot of water, and they can contribute to degrade soils. So if you do that, I'm not saying eucalyptus is bad everywhere. It's not the point. It's just about being balanced in the way you measure the impact. And so measure the carbon impact, but also the impact you have on the soils, the impact you have on biodiversity, on the richness or the restoration of the variety of species. And if you aggregate all these possible KPIs, then you have a pretty robust impact, as you mentioned, without saying you have no risks, because you have a lot of KPIs, both environmental and social. We set up what we call ESAPs, so environmental and social action plans, and then we follow those action plans through the KPIs and monitoring reports. So we can do that at small size, and then ideally we can scale that. And to be frank, once it's processed and defined, it's much easier to replicate that for larger projects, because project developers, they know how it works. They're used to those standards, which are recommended by UNCCD for the land restoration, by IFC on the basic social rights and implementation of a typical project. So I mean, once it's well understood, it's easy to replicate, and you can reach scale. It's just that you need time to do that. So to me, there is not an opposition between scale and impact. It's more about the temporality around which you can really reach scale with impact. Today, there is one risk of having impact with scale too fast, which is the example I was giving, one example, on carbon pledges, with net zero strategies and massive investments to into afforestation or reforestation initiative with one only focused on carbon emissions and not enough on the rest. That's a risk, but there are many ways to to avoid that kind of risk. The only element to bear in mind is that, of course, if you don't want to make a trade-off between impact and scale, you're going to earn probably a bit less, but you will have a higher impact of your projects, which I think makes us come to the next aspect of how we look at investment. In the traditional financial world, we look at risk return. And now we need to add impact. And impact is actually what externalities that are not embedded into either risk or return, but that should be taken into account. And when you look at those three dimensions, I think we can make very robust investments from both impact perspective, scale perspective, and risk return is pretty decent as well. Again, sorry for the long
Perfect.
answer.
I'm going to add one question because you were talking about, in fact, being exhaustive in terms of impact. And we know that it can be difficult to also measure and talk about negative impacts. Do you think that investors are ready to have this analysis of potential negative externalities of their project? Because it also needs to be taken into account. And do you think you are ready to first measure, but also communicate on these negative parts of a project?
Well, we try to invest only in projects where we actually don't have negative externalities. So I think what private investors like in such projects is that we bring something else on the table and we answer today's challenges for both society and planet. And a number of institutional investors, such as insurance companies, pension funds, endowments, they understand that their fiduciary duty is wrong from a regulatory standpoint. So they need to add another dimension. And before being vocal on the limits of what the definition of definition of fiduciary duty, which is actually fiduciary duty, you must optimize the risk-return framework of the investor, of your ultimate client, so the client of an insurance company. But if you do that without looking at the externalities, the negative externalities you generate, you can argue that the fiduciary duty is not great because optically the risk return is going to be good, but at the end of the day you destroy the planet and the working conditions. So you can challenge that. And so I think investors understand that more and more. And so if we are in a capacity to demonstrate what we bring on the table, they like that and they see us as a lab for them to understand what will probably come into the regulation next. And I think there was a very good example on Rabobank like a week ago. There are new regulations which are starting to be more stringent on the use of fertilizers and so on, and which will progressively ban the use of fertilizers because it washes and destroys the soils. And banks such as Rabobank, which is a bank which is highly exposed to agriculture, they just thought, well, if our agriculture counterparts that we finance can use less fertilizers in their soils, they will have less yield short term, and so they will be less able to repay the credit we gave them. And so we must make provisions, bad debt provisions, in our balance sheets. That's what Rabo has done a couple of days ago. And I think educated, sophisticated institutional investors, they get that what is not yet integrated into risk-return framework may come. And that's why also they pay attention, not because of morale. They know that at some point it will be integrated into a new norm, into regulation. And so they need to understand that and to anticipate that.
Thanks a lot. Denis, we know that GFIs have contributed a lot to de-risk investments, but we have also said that we still need to catalyze and channel more capital towards especially least developed countries. What are the obstacles to, let's say, have this a leverage effect and to catalyze more capital towards these least developed countries, and potentially maybe some change or reforms that we need to do in order to be able to have more capital there?
So, first of all, de-risking mainly comes from government money. So, with all the recent crises, we've seen that a lot of national budgets, they have to be channeled to COVID support, and then we're going to have an energy crisis, so there are going to be subsidies and grants because this is a priority topic. So let's say that the potential pockets of money available for de-risking is quite limited and tight. So the first challenge is that this pocket of money is not unlimited, so we have to use it wisely. But in the case of France, for example, the themes like climate change and protection of biodiversity in emerging markets are quite important. So these pockets of money are available and they are not decreasing, which is the good news for the future. But again, because we have to use it wisely, we need to be very specific on the project that we try to support. And often it's a fine line, especially when you work with the private sector. You have to be sure that you go with a company that really puts the impact in the center of its strategy, because you cannot finance a private company that is using government money for an opportunistic use of the funds. So our job is really to work with partners with whom we discuss and we really test the vision and the mission and the good faith of these partners, because essentially, historically, a private company's goal was to make money, to oversimplify. But I totally concur with what you've just said about risk return. Cannot be the only two things that a company look at. I mean, this ship has sailed. Now it has to be risk, return, and impact. So really choose the private companies that are putting impact at the center of its strategy. And de-risking, basically the concept is to put a little bit of risk out of the shoulder of this private company so that they can focus on the impact. And I'll give you a few examples. During the COVID crisis, we met a South African company that had a great business model in terms of rolling out COVID tests in Africa. But we know that in Africa, the COVID tests are not always subsidized by the government. So the business model did not really make sense. And we could use de-risking to take a little bit of risk out of the shoulder of this private company. We know that they were really honest about their mission. And thanks to de-risking, they could roll out some COVID tests in Africa. Now we are doing a little bit the same with the food security crisis in Africa, where now it's a bit less true, but a few months ago when the wheat prices were super high, we did anticipate that some companies were not able to import wheat and bread and pasta. They were really important for the consumers. So we met some private companies that wanted to import wheat at a price that was not sustainable for them, but we did de-risk a little bit their project to put a little bit of weight out of their shoulders so that they can still produce pasta and bread for the people in the country. So this is really when de-risking makes sense, is when we are sure that our partners, they have this impact mission, and I'm quite optimistic about that, because it takes time, it takes too much time, of course, but we see more and more private companies going into this game, and I'm just hoping that this is going to be accelerating again and again.
And maybe one additional questions, because Anne-Laurence have mentioned also the necessity to have a long-term vision, and sometimes we have tools and the framework to think in terms of a 10 years handed fund or this kind of timeline that is more, let's say, traditional. Do you think that we could change this kind of timeline and the way that we are thinking the tool, or is it too difficult to have it? To say that, for example, at INP, we always quite often think about changing it, but then we say it's difficult to find funding if you don't check the box about some parameters. Do you think that GFIs can be ready to make this change?
I mean, it's a good question, but also a difficult one, because, I mean, Anne-Laurence mentioned the coalitions, and we are trying to set the norms all together so that the standards, they are transparent and we can have a long-term vision. But if you take some concrete examples, for example, and I'm not here to open debates, but electric vehicles, is it positive for the planet or is it not positive for the planet? I mean, there are more and more controversy, especially in France, about this theme. Another example is gas, and I don't want to open the debate about taxonomy, but again, I mean, you can ask two very professional experts about that, and they're going to give you two opposite answers. So it's important that we set common standards, but the devil is in the details, and the way technology is approached now, we not all companies are using scope 3, and now we are talking about scope 4 to make the calculation about our carbon impact. So I wish we could all harmonize ourselves, but it's an endless work.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. What are steps that needs to be taken forward to support the integrity of sustainable finance market and help fighting also impact washing?
I think we can talk about standards, which is probably what you expect me to say, but I'm not sure. I'm not a big standards fan because I think it also distracts and there's too many labels and certificates, and oftentimes it gets confusing, or you're not sure which one's really the truly verifiable, accountable one. I think it's a question of increasing the supply of capital, because I think the more investor scrutiny that comes into this market, the more the integrity of the instruments is going to increase. I think we've certainly seen that with the SLB, the sustainability-linked bond and loan market already, as investors are beginning to criticize now or actually critique the KPIs. I think it's not really appropriate to say we have 5 years to improve our diversity and equity and inclusion by adding one woman to the board. And I mean, I don't know, I'm very highly skeptical when we see some of these very loose targets. That said, I think with the sovereign bond market especially, we are really improving the integrity of the products. UNDP is doing that through the SDG links with the uses of proceeds. So I think we've been very rigorous and thoughtful in how the impact frameworks are developed. It's probably where we add the most value, is ensuring that the financing is actually going to flow to products that have strong SDG attributes. By bringing more of these products to market, I think we can improve the investor flows. And what that's going to do is really improve the capacity, improve overall market access, and make sure that more and more investors. I think also the prevalence of exchanges and bringing these instruments into the markets formally through exchanges is going to help. So overall, I think it's a supply question, and then also having our banking partners sell these products to their clients, effectively put them in the portfolios, show the diversification benefits, show the positive impacts, and then de-risk it in the sense of investors won't be afraid of these niche instruments as they think. So probably money is the answer to most of our problems.
Okay, thanks a lot. We wanted to save some time for a Q&A, so we already had two round of questions. So I'm not supposed to be allowed to have more questions, but I have many more if if you don't have. But maybe we can open the discussion if you have questions to our panelists. Don't be shy and feel free to challenge them. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Chloe. I work for Value Cometrics. I'm first of all, thank you for being here today, and to anyone who wishes to answer, I'm curious about what you think of the diversity that there is today, or the lack of correlation in ESG scores built by different data providers, built by asset managers in-house because of this divergence in ESG scores. Thank you.
I can take a first shot. Basically, when you rate a company, you can rate a company based on two aspects. One is the product and services that the company or the issuer is providing. So are these products and services contributing to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals? Yes or no, and to which intensity? So that's one. The other one is what is the overall CSR quality? What are the processes of a given issuer? The way the workforce is managed, the environmental risks are managed. But to some extent, it has nothing to do with the product. You can have a chemical company with robust processes, but products that are ultimately pretty dirty. And so it can happen that a number of data providers rate more the CSR, so the process, than the product and the goods. So that's one. The second aspect of the story is the size of the issuer. The larger the size of the issuer, the more resources the issuer will devote to communication and investor relations about its ESG quality. And so symmetrically, small size or medium-sized company, they have less resources devoted to that, so they can be better exposed to in terms of product and services, and potentially also in terms of CSR, but they communicate less well on it. And so those two aspects, so size and focus from the data provider on either product and services or CSR versus a combination of the two, can generate huge differences.
Can I ask a follow-up, actually? Yeah. On that specifically. So I think, if I don't want to put words in your mouth, but why is there such a divergence between what S&P says versus Sustainalytics? Or I think there was a study that just came out. I don't want to put the pressure on you, but why is there this big difference now among even the providers?
Well, for those reasons.
Maybe there's also something about what you put behind. Today there is not a standard way of putting points in job creation versus, for example, environmental destruction. So if you have a company that, creates some jobs and at the same point has a bad environmental or pollutes or whatever, how do you actually put the balance? How do you say, okay, it's going to be plus 1 notch or minus 2 notches? So there is no value given to each of the components of social or environmental, and at the same time, no compensating value between each ones, then it can, it can be whatever the result is, how many persons are rating, actually. That's what I see.
Thanks a lot. More questions?
Hello, I'm Alexandre from Cois Invest. So I have a question. When it comes to SDG-linked investment, I think that the countries that are the most in need for financing are actually the ones with the most difficult context in terms of political situation, credit rating, etc. And so I think it might be more tempting for investors who want to enter this space to direct their investment towards countries that are a bit better off in terms of context. So how can we prevent this trap, kind of, and direct the investment in the countries who need them the most, even though they have a very difficult context?
I can answer partly because this came up just yesterday. So I work with a number of insurers as well, and reinsurers, and part of what we try to do is secure political risk insurance or other types of credit risk enhancement tools. And specifically in the case of Pakistan, so they have been quite vocal about wanting to launch a nature performance bond, a debt for nature swap, etc. Eventually, a thematic product has been produced by a bank. They even secured political risk insurance, so the pieces were all in place. But in fact, they can't place the product with investors because even with this de-risking element, investors still won't touch it. I think it's about a 400 million instrument, so quite significant. So this came up maybe a day or two ago on a call, and I think UNDP's role would be to help do that. But I mean, I'm very interested in the answer to this question because I'm not sure who we convince as an institution, or if it's up to the banking institutions to convince their clients. But it's very, very pertinent what you're asking, but I don't know the answer.
Thanks. This is Lucia from rating agency MFR. Thanks a lot for your very interesting inputs. I would love to hear your views regarding the following. In impact finance, how, and especially in the least developed countries, how do you see your roles in terms of improving the situation versus only investing in a situation that meets all of the very high standards that we may want to achieve ultimately? To make a very concrete example, I was based 4 years in Cameroon, and I would see trucks and trucks full of wonderful trees, you know, being shipped at the port. And the situation there, as in many countries, is that because of the standards of managing the forests, as a matter of fact, European investments were reduced because, you know, we were pretty ambitious in terms. I think you understand the problem. And as a result, forests are now being managed by companies from China and from other countries which have different sets of standards. So my question has always been, looking at those tracks and tracks, what shall we do? Shall we aim for the best and not invest in anything that doesn't meet that standard, or be gradual?
I can give a first try. I think we try to be pragmatic. When we invest in projects, it's never perfect immediately. But I think Denis mentioned that we need to, first we try to understand how sincere the project developers are. And if they want to change and to adjust to our requirements, then we can finance them and elaborate this environment and social action plan with them. But if we feel they are not really willing to do that, we cannot do that. And then ultimately what can happen is that they will completely, their forest will get depleted, and then they will start thinking again, well, I need to get financing to manage it more sustainably. So, I mean, we can take risks, and to some extent, it's part of our job to take risk and also not to be perfect, whilst at the same time saying we are an impact-driven fund, so we invest in projects where project developers aren't perfect but are getting there for their projects. But if they are not strongly willing to do it and giving signals and meeting standards, I mean, we want the CPs to disbursements, the condition to typically a loan disbursement, we will consider they are not met, so we will stop the financing.
No, I just said I fully agree. There are three main. Either you choose to finance, or you choose to finance things that are already perfect and you just finance them. You choose to not finance things that are not going well and you just don't finance them. And then there's all this transition and improve. It's the improve part, but the improve is necessarily something that you need to address in a progressive way, because you need to measure also the improvement when they get there. And maybe just the product I was talking about, the impact bond, is typically about that. You have a situation that you want to improve to another situation. We define things to actually reach, and you have each year measurements to see if you're getting there. And if you're not getting there, you're actually allowed with the governance to change some things to actually be, okay, this is not working as to get the target I want to get there. So I just change a little bit the way I act in order to be able to reach the target. So I think this is also, I think impact is also about helping getting there, just as Laurence was saying.
Hi, thank you for your presentations. I was just wondering, there's a lot of investment going towards mitigating climate change, but as we look towards Pakistan today, for example, there's already the effects of climate change. How do investors look at adaptation for these effects?
So I think this question is also linked to the question that you asked about the least developed countries, because the least developed countries are also the ones that are going to be probably the most affected by climate change. So they need investment for development, but also for attenuation, mitigation. And I mean, 10 years ago, there was still a debate about whether we should focus mainly on adaptation, on attenuation, but I mean, at least for AFD Proparco, I mean, Pakistan is a good example. Whenever we support climate investment, we view adaptation and attenuation as important one to another, because these countries are going to be more affected than Europe, for example, and we can see that now, and unfortunately it's going to be more and more true. So we do put a lot of focus on those investments. What's difficult is that, for example, a renewable energy project easily qualifies as a project that is going to be good to limit the effect of climate change, I mean to reduce CO2 emission. But I mentioned earlier electric vehicles. When it comes to helping the countries to adapt to climate change, we see a lot of projects where our experts are still telling us that they're a bit in a gray zone in terms of technology, in terms of it's about water, it's about irrigation, it's about agricultural practices. So these projects are more complicated in essence. So it's taking a bit more time to ramp up, but in theory it's as important, and we should put a lot of efforts in this space.
Do you have more questions? Or the panelists have already answered to all your questions.
Hello, everyone. So my name's Sarah. I work in sustainable finance. It's just maybe a comment. So I work from debt side, so maybe my view is more biased, but I have this feeling that for anything that's use of proceeds, as you said, the answer is pretty self-explanatory. You finance renewable projects that are going to benefit and help in terms of climate mitigation, etc. But anything that's not like investment in projects or like use of proceeds based, and yeah, this entire part, as you mentioned, so the social impact bond is a very niche part of it, and there's the sustainability linked that indeed there's many criticism to it. So, but like, shouldn't we focus particularly on this instrument? And maybe it's the temporality that is problematic, as you mentioned. Like in 5 years, there's nothing much that a company can achieve, maybe. But isn't it where we should direct our efforts as like a first step, as the person mentioned before? Like we need to go gradually. Like, what's your view on this?
Maybe just what we can see is that maybe we can just be a little bit more ambitious in the targets that are set. It's all about for me, all the products. They are either SDG compatible. It means that they don't hurt SDGs. They're SDG aligned, meaning that they're more like in the main, they try to have a positive outcome, and either they're SDG driven. That means that their first purpose is to actually have a positive net impact on people and the planet. And probably all products that are in the galaxy, they can actually tick the boxes depending on what the purpose you put in each of them. So sustainability linked bonds, they can be very compatible, meaning that you can have, like Laurence would say, just okay, one more woman in the board for next 5 years, and that's it. Or put in place a CSR policy, for example, and it can be reducing of X% the consumption of water in each of my factories. And this is getting more towards something that is more stringent and more towards driven and impact. And probably this is the reflection that needs to be done in most of the products that are actually available today.
Maybe I can add something about the underlying markets in which we invest. I don't know on which market you are active, if it's on kind of traditional fixed income or listed equities or on private assets. I think what's interesting is to so.
It's on debt instruments, loans and bonds mostly.
Okay, so which means that bonds are typically issued by pretty large companies or public bodies, because and therefore the bigger the institution or the bigger the issuer, the higher the chance that its activity is a mixed bag of good and less good activities, which means that if you invest your savings on public markets, so large caps in equity or bonds, your impact will be actually to some extent limited, because it will concern only a portion of the businesses of the issuer in which you invest. It's a bit different in private assets. When we say that, should we then derive that we should not invest anymore on listed markets, on bonds, on large companies? I wouldn't say that either, because I think those big names, they also have the financial means to change. And so they have legacy business. They are changing to new, greener and more sustainable businesses. So for those issuers that in the listed markets, I would stay open. I think there is a line that should be drawn a bit more clearly between, in those big players, those who are really transitioning, actively transitioning. It's key in their strategic plan, in their capex allocation, and those who are not actively transitioning. And for those, it makes probably more sense to allocate, to disinvest and allocate more to private assets where the additionality and impact is probably easier to track, but the liquidity is lower. So to me, it's kind of a fine line, but being very clear on what you can achieve through listed markets and where you definitely should, to some extent, not invest if you really want to finance a transition, a fast transition.
Last question.
Thank you very much. Loïc de Fontobert from Rassembleur d'énergie. I was wondering, Maha, you mentioned sustainability-linked bond. It reminds me of demand dividend instrument. Is there a difference? Of what, sorry? Demand dividend. It's because we used it a few years ago. It was designed in Santa Clara by John Kohler. Does it ring a bell or?
No, sorry, it doesn't.
Because it's really the same story, but the idea is great. And I was wondering whether you could share the documentation you used for similar operations.
I'm sorry, we're 200,000 people. Probably someone else did on this. I don't know this dividend. The same thing. But it's dividend. It means that.
It's a loan indexed on out of
But so it's a sustainability-linked loan because we do have. Because it's the same mechanism. The loan, it could be a bond issued on the debt market, and it could be loaned, a bank lending to a specific counterpart, and the same mechanism, meaning that the interest rate for the counterparty decreases as as the targets are met, and it decreases, and it could increase if the impact targets are not met. Oh, you only have the nice one. Okay, you're lucky. You're lucky, but I don't know this specific operation. Sorry.
I mean, demand dividend was also tied to the ability to pay. So we looked at it for a chocolate company you're probably referring to, not just the impact. So it's also the company's ability to generate from.
Out of the cash flow generated.
Exactly. So with the SLBs, though, it's not. I mean, financing is not. It's an ex ante, I guess. Requirement, whereas, so I think it's a little bit different, but I think the concept of having impact targets being tied to the step up or step down is probably the same, but I think demand dividend has fallen out of favor, but I don't know why.
Okay. Is there any last question? Perfect. So I'm maybe going to thank our panelists for this very interesting discussion. We have seen that we still have a lot of work to do, but we have also seen that we know that let's say the global financial flows are already here, and the issue is to channel it towards the SDGs. We can see also that new tools and solutions are growing in order to do that. We still have a lot of challenge to do it, how to measure it, how to scale up, how to reach the poorest and the least developed countries. So we still have a lot of work to do, but thanks a lot for these discussions. Thanks again to UNDP for organizing this conference. Maybe just one marketing phrase that I had to say. It was, don't forget to follow future session of UNDP on sustainable finance, and especially if you want to assist to the Building Bridges Week in Geneva between 3 and 6 October 2022. So thanks to you also for hearing this session. I hope you have found it interesting, and thanks again to our panelists.